We spent about 10 days on the first shoot. I had been there for months and months before with no camera. They were kind of skeptical we were actually going to make a movie. But we finally showed up with the camera and filmed a bunch during morning meeting, but it was clear that like morning meeting was going to have its limits, right? And so what else could you do? So this was a test by Mr. C and Alex, because I was like, well, what are you going to do? What else is happening? And they're like, well, we're going to do the 4 a.m. cleanup. And they totally were expecting me to say, no, we're not going to come to that. And I was like, okay. I turned to Andre. I was like, you game? He's like, I'm game. But there was only 2 spots in the garbage part of the truck. So Andre and sound went at 4 a.m. They tested me a million other ways, but they got that we were there and we were committed to what they were interested in showing us. And no one had ever said, sure, yeah, we're going to come for garbage cleanup at 4 a.m. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so that was that. And then I think the other thing that was really interesting about the way we had to structure this film is you could not get out of a police car in East Baltimore and expect to be able to show up at Rose Street for morning meeting and whatever else would follow that day. And you also could not be found hanging out on the corner with the Rose Street guys and still expect to get into a police car. Plus they'd know where we were, and then you couldn't promise the confidentiality and security we were trying to give them. So we actually made a decision to have 2 separate crews. Uh-huh. So the only person, it was me and one co-producer who was a local Baltimore. She started as my PA and became the co-producer. We were the only 2 that ever kind of, as I said, crossed over. But otherwise, Andre shot on Rose Street, and then we had a local Baltimore cinematographer, John Benham, who filmed all the police stuff. And then anybody could shoot Brandon Scott, the councilman. Right. And so that was its own dance, of sort of, where am I, where are you, and I tried never to commingle trips. So I'd come down for police shoots or I'd come down for community shoots. But I didn't want the cops to be like, so you should come here now. And I didn't want to say, but I can't because I'm shooting somewhere else. So it was we tried to just have this real solid wall between the 2.
And can you talk a little bit about how you gain trust with the community? Mm-hmm. You're an outsider, mm-hmm. You just pop in.
I'm white, yeah.
Yeah, you're white.
Yeah, I mean, so Baltimore is a little bit different than I think other bigger cities, where if you're there to help, you're there to help. And so that was it was easier, and something actually the kind of funders of the documentary world didn't understand, that, so we were, and rightly, who tells whose story, but we also had a methodology for how to help people tell their own story. So a little bit in Baltimore was easier to be there and to be seen as helpful and not have the same race politics that we have in other places. So that was a benefit. We did very purposefully bring in Andre Lambertson, who had been he actually worked for the Baltimore Sun for many years, but was back in New York, African-American photographer, cinematographer. And so, we brought him into the project and made him a co-producer, and Andre alone decided when to turn the camera on and off, even if I was there. So if we were in the middle of something, he's like, I'm not feeling this representation. We abided by that. And also every other crew member was local Baltimore. So we had a way of, and then people literally thought I was from Baltimore. I was actually very proud when the Baltimore Sun reviewed the film. They said, local Baltimore filmmaker Marilyn Ness. And I was like, there's no reason to issue a correction. I was living there for 3 years. So we just found a way, and I educated myself on the local politics, and this is like just time on. Like, and why it took me 4 months till I brought a camera. How many people are you going to talk to? What's different east and west? What's happening here? What does this community center look like versus this community center? Like, these are shiny and not built for the folks of Rose Street. Finding Rose Street was a gift. So you spend time, and then the trust was we called Mr. C, who was very much, if you're here to help, you're welcome. But we kept coming back with his permission. We'd show up at morning meeting and weren't asking for much, and we're talking to guys, and if they wanted to talk, they did, and if they didn't, they didn't, and we didn't push. And and I think Mr. C, like, what he prides himself on is being a judge of character, and he would ask me tough questions. We would sit in his truck. I mean, we went through the why are you doing this? Why are you here? You know, my guys feel unsafe. You know, a lot of them don't want to be on camera. And so we set up a bunch of like I consulted with a lawyer, you know, what risk would they be in, what would they not be in? You know, let's not talk about crimes on camera when we're willing to shut the camera off. Because in morning meeting, things would come up. Giving them notice, so the guys who wanted to opt out of coming opted out. We never roamed the neighborhood alone. You know, you'd have to go with Alex or Mr. C. We spent a long time with Alex and with his family and with his kids. And, you know, and I think not bringing the camera and people being able to look you in the eye matters. And I think sometimes we're so purpose driven, or we're on a schedule, or we're on a budget, or we're on a whatever, and we're like, I just got to start shooting. And I just find it's counterintuitive, but the longer you don't shoot, the better stuff you're going to get. But you know, you have to be able to invest that time. And and we didn't necessarily have money, so that was also cheap, right? No, I don't cost anything. I mean, I do, but I don't. So I would just keep going down. I slept on couches, and you know, I had a lot of Amtrak points. So I just kept going back. So I think it was time, because also what was true, and I knew instantly about this place, is because there was so much publicity around the wire and homicide, people felt utterly unseen and judged before you ever got there. And so the idea that you'd spend time, and then after Freddie Gray, you know, the media proved itself to be what it was, and I was still there. So